we went through the Lincoln Riley conversation with Dennis Dodd that you raised to me before we came on the air here. We sampled the Oklahoma audience and on our Oklahoma show, which is coming up this Friday on our OU channel. And I'm expecting the angle, the perspective, the narrative from the live chat here to be slightly different than what we experienced the other day on the Oklahoma channel.
Slightly. Yeah. I would say that, when Lincoln Riley said he didn't have, the best roster in the playoff, that it was, third at best of the four, I don't think he was way off the mark. And I also don't think he was throwing his players under the bus. Like, that's a criticism I've seen from Oklahoma fans. No, it just meant that Alabama and Clemson had better rosters. That's what that is. That's not, taking the sledgehammer to your own players and the caliber of players that you had. Now, I think where he's incorrect, I think in 2017, the 2018 Rose Bowl against Georgia, Oklahoma did not have inferior talent. And you saw that. You saw that with the 31-14 lead. You saw that with taking Georgia into overtime. You saw that with scoring over 40 on a Kirby Smart defense. That was an elite offensive line that Oklahoma had. It was able to stand up to Georgia's front seven. Oklahoma did not have deficient or inferior talent that year. Now, in 2018 and 2019, yes, that was the Grand Canyon size gap, and Alabama and LSU threw OU around the field like a dirty old rag. In those two cases, yes. But in 2017, Oklahoma was not the third or fourth most talented team in the Final Four. Let's also keep in mind in 2017, Oklahoma was better than Clemson. That was the Kelly Bryant Clemson team. I would have taken Oklahoma over that Clemson team because Kelly Bryant would not have been able to keep up with Oklahoma over the course of 60 minutes. Baker Mayfield certainly would have been able to beat him. And Alabama, of course, got the fortunate draw playing Clemson in the semis instead of Oklahoma or Georgia, who are better teams that particular year. So Lincoln Riley is partly correct, but I don't agree with him in the 2017 portion of his statement saying that Oklahoma was at best the third most talented team in the playoff, not in 2017.
So what happens in these situations is what the head coach in this case has to say. That gains the headlines, and that's what everyone talks about, and not necessarily looking into what was asked, what was the context of the conversation, all of those things. So did Lincoln Riley really need to state that his team was third or fourth best in the playoffs in those particular years? Because I don't think that that's a comment that needs to be made myself. He's right. I don't think he's incorrect in his evaluation of his team, but I do think it's a slight on his team.
Maybe, and I think you could certainly make the argument, but I certainly agree with you. What is the point? What is the purpose? Like, how does he translate that into something positive? I guess the only thing that he could do as a result of saying that was, well, I learned at Oklahoma that I need to recruit at a higher level if I want to have one of the two most talented teams in a future college football playoff. I guess that would be the only real way Lincoln Riley turns that into a positive. It turns it into a motivating factor for him. But yeah, why do you say that about the place you just left? Like, it's certainly not going to make anybody feel good. And of course, you do have this situation where Lincoln Riley is making this explanation tour. He also talked to ESPN's Chris Lowe this past week, gave an interview about the exit at Oklahoma. And so he's saying, well, I could have handled this better, could have done a better job, could have been a smoother process. And yet he's making this comment to Dennis Dodd about his Oklahoma rosters not measuring up. So, that's just going to create more hurt feelings. That itself is not really doing the best job in terms of detaching himself from Oklahoma, moving on with the next chapter. This is just going to perpetuate questions about the Oklahoma side, which Lincoln Riley, at least theoretically, is trying to get away from. He's trying to create this clean slate at USC. So he does seem to be defeating the purpose of this media tour, talking to all these prominent national reporters. The point is to make things quiet down at Oklahoma, to reduce the temperature in the room at Oklahoma. Didn't do that with these remarks, especially that remark to Dennis Dodd.
I basically see it as, if you're stating that you had the third or fourth best roster out of a 14 playoff, then you are washing your hands of any responsibility of coaching those teams to victories. You're basically saying, I couldn't coach them to wins. We weren't good enough.
I think he's certainly saying that the deck was stacked against him because you had, Saban and Dabo with the superpowers at their height. Also, 2019 LSU, arguably the most talented team in college football history, or at least alongside 2001 Miami, 1995 Nebraska, one of the true juggernauts of the sport. But yeah, you could say that it's just about the other team having the better players. But other people are certainly going to read into it in a different way. It's certainly, he's leaving the issue open. Instead of closing the door on these topics, which is ostensibly the point of this media tour, he's actually just leaving the box. He's leaving the door open, and he's perpetuating the questions instead of ending them. And so I don't think that he's achieving the goals that he probably had in mind. Now, one could raise the alternative point that this media tour with ESPN and CBS is just to keep USC in the news cycle in the off season, because no one wanted to talk about USC in the past several off seasons under Clay Helton. So Lincoln Riley is filling that vacuum here in the month of June. Maybe that's the purpose. And if that's the case, okay, he achieved his goal and he did something positive. Like, he's just getting USC in the news cycle. He knows that Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit are going to call several of his games this year after having absolutely nothing to do with USC the previous few years. So if he just wants to create like an ownership of the calendar, kind of an NFL model that, own the calendar wherever the time of year it is, make publicity, get your name out there. If that's his goal, and maybe it is, then he's succeeding. But if he wants to close the door on his Oklahoma years, start fresh, no, he is not achieving that goal with these interviews. Let's just be honest about that.
So that is the comment that stood out to me regarding the past. The comment that stood out to me regarding him setting expectations was by separating USC and Oklahoma in regards to what is possible, what's achievable, what the levels are, and he's distinguishing USC as a better program than Oklahoma, basically saying we can achieve anything here. That wasn't necessarily the case in the past in Norman. So he's setting himself up for, okay, here's the bar. It's raised mighty high, and it already was. But again, I don't know that he's doing himself a lot of favors.